Hey guys, welcome back to another session with me, Kenneth. We are going to be painting a very special model today. This is Varag Ghoul Chewer, or at least the original version of Varag. This is back in the heady days of Blood Bowl season, well, not season 2, Blood Bowl um, second edition, which is the first box set that you get from Games Workshop. And if for those of you who really remember, this is the blue colored box, that one that came with the styrofoam box. Well, is it that one? No, now that I think about it, it's for third edition. My mistake. Yeah, because I began playing Blood Bowl a long time ago with the version of the game that had the styrofoam pitch. And I don't think this model was from that era, although I might be mistaken. Oh well. However it is, he was either one of the very late models from that edition or the one immediately before, and the one immediately after. And this guy is one of those models that I always wanted to have in my collection, but never quite got around to getting and painting. So, Varag Ghoul, every one of the races in Blood Bowl, the major races, that means your dwarves, your elves, your skaven, and so on, typically had one character that kind of typified or that was good or effective about that particular race. So, for example, you've got like Jeremiah Cool for the Dark Elves, you have Griff Obervolt for the humans. For orcs, it was specifically Varag Ghoul, so named for his nasty habit of eating ghouls, which was, I think, a reference to American baseball players chewing tobacco. So yeah, it's just one of those really strange little Blood Bowl anachronisms that kind of doesn't fit into anything in the Warhammer world. During second, third edition, and I think up to fourth edition Blood Bowl, the Warhammer world as well as the Blood Bowl world were two different worlds. They were not the same setting. If you think about it that way, Blood Bowl was more of like an alternate reality world where basically all of the races of the old world kind of discovered the pitch of Nuffle. So Nuffle was that long lost god who had basically championed the use of a sport called Blood Bowl, or in the words of Roselle, who was the first dwarf who could actually read that stone plaque that was unearthed with the first stadium of Nuffle. He said it was a style of ritual combat used for deciding conflicts and ending conflict in that sense. So Blood Bowl was originally something that was designed to settle the quarrels of nations and kings, so that all would not end in bloodshed. And to this end, Blood Bowl was quickly adopted because at the time of its discovery, the stadium of Nuffle, Nuffle is NFL, by the way, just in case you were wondering, because it was that era of humor, and this is Jervis Johnson that we're talking about. So Nuffle, the god of Blood Bowl, really sort of championed the use of this sport to try to reduce conflict and death in the world. And at the time that the stadium was discovered, I think it was very timely indeed, as it is the Warhammer world was again in another one of its many continent-spanning wars, and you had the dwarves on one side and the orcs on the other, primarily as the combatants which are named in that early piece of background material. And the story goes that they adopted this to sort of save future generations from bloodshed, and that's why you have Blood Bowl today, as a game that's designed to bring all of the races of fantasy together to enjoy the sport, which is, I mean, clearly loosely based on American football, right? Like, there's a lot more crumping and killing and bomb throwing and chainsawing, but yeah, it's essentially American football, I suppose, or its analog in this fantasy setting. So Varag Ghoul enters this mix as the most successful orc captain ever, for the most successful orc Blood Bowl team ever, and that would be the Gouged Eye, which began kind of as a laughing stock of the league There was another orc team that was far more successful, and that was the Orkland Raiders. Those of you whose ears perked up at that point probably remember the Oakland Raiders, and obviously this is just very in line with Warhammer. This is very in line with Blood Bowl making fun of real life things through their use of wordplay and so on. So in the same vein, you've got things like Orchidas, which is a sponsor, and Orchidas is obviously Adidas, right? So kind of cute, kind of its time, and kind of maybe representing Games Workshop at a point where they weren't so wildly litigious, because they were clearly having a lot more fun with these names and ideas back then. Surprisingly enough, these names do still find their way into the latest edition of Blood Bowl, something which I greatly appreciate. And I think the game would be a lot more kind of impoverished without all these little bits of like reference humor and so on. So I really appreciate that that's still a thing. Plus, it would lighten up, I guess, the image of Games Workshop a little bit if they didn't delete these things, at least in my opinion. But I really enjoyed things like the Necromancers broadcasting Cabal, which is NBC, your Cabal Vision, which is of course Cable Vision in the US, and then you've got Cabal News Network, which is the CNN equivalent. Great stuff. Lots of really silly, not to be taken too seriously kind of humor, and I really appreciated their inclusion. Anyway, Varag Gochua. So clearly a reference to American baseball players chewing chaw and tobacco during their games while they waited their turn at the bat or within the dugouts. And this guy is not to be taken too seriously insofar as, not to be taken too seriously as a character, but he was certainly a force of nature on the pitch. So Varag Gochua was primarily known for being an unusual orc, as is so often the case with orc characters. Varag had the ability to think and be a little bit smarter. And if you sort of think about it, this trope of an orc who doesn't act like an orc is very prevalent in many of the early Games Workshop games as well. I mean, this is essentially the story of Azak the Slaughterer, right? Except there is no crown of sorcery involved, just an orc who's basically learned how to count without taking his gloves and his shoes off. So very, very cool. The question also is he an orc or is he a black orc? Because in the original version, he had the stat line of a jumped up orc blitzer, a very experienced orc blitzer with had quite a few level ups and so on. But in the most recent, what they call second season of Blood Bowl, which really I think we should probably call it Blood Bowl 2020. Blood Bowl 2020, he's now moved to become captain of the Thunder Valley Greenskins because they released the Black Orc team, the brand new Black Orc team, and the sort of poster boy team was the Thunder Valley Greenskins. That's the name that appears on the box set. And his old team, the Gouged Eye, kind of notably doesn't feature him anywhere in their fluff. So that's a little bit unfortunate. I guess they did something similar as well with Gryff Oberwald, right? Who basically goes on to leave his beloved Reikland Reavers to join the Imperial Nobility team called the Bogenhafen Barons, which is an unusual choice because Bogenhafen is a tiny town and Reikland is the most important province in the Empire. At least it's the one that has Altdorf, which is the capital of the Empire. So there you go. But, inconsistencies like that aside, you don't have to worry too much about it, I suppose. He's just a really good orc character. But then there's also the other idea. Sorry, there's another thing. Is he an orc or a black orc? Because in old Warhammer lore, black orcs are actually creations of the Chaos Dwarves. And the Chaos Dwarves actually do exist in Blood Bowl. In fact, they just released a Blood Bowl team called the Xanagran Ziggurats. So that happened. So then, is this an orc that was, I don't know, cobbled together by Chaos Dwarves in the lab somewhere to be some kind of an amazing, Frankenstein-y kind of creation? Or is he just, it's just Blood Bowl. Blood Bowl is its own thing. Let's not get too lost in the weeds about it. Anyway, this is Orc Flesh. Quite appropriately, I've chosen a slightly darker tone for the skin than I do versus all of my usual orcs. And I've done that by design because I think I'd like to keep the question of whether he's a black orc or a regular orc a little bit more open. And I can feel free to play him either way based on my leanings. As it is, Varag is available to any team that's playing in among the Badlands. So you could even have him for like ogres, for instance, and that wouldn't be an issue. But Varag is an interesting case because he is extremely effective. He is a killing machine. His only real weakness being the fact that he doesn't have dodge. And dodge, as you probably know, if you play Blood Bowl, is the second best skill in the game. The best skill, of course, being block, which he does have. The combination of block and dodge makes for a real bruiser on the pitch because it means that you're very unlikely to be knocked down, and conversely, you can continue to go around knocking people over with impunity. So unfortunately, that winning combination is denied to our poor boy over here, but he does have many other skills which make him an effective leader, including, among other things, oddly enough, the ability to jump up, which is a weird one because if he can jump up, and so, by the way, I'm talking about earlier editions of Blood Bowl, yeah? Historically, he used to have jump up. I don't think he has it anymore because jump up is such a strange skill. It's the one that allows him to stand up for free at the start of his activation. And that's just not a thing, I believe, with this edition's Varag. To be fair, the new Varag Go-Chewer miniature is ginormous, right? Like if you were ever in doubt about whether he's a black orc or a regular orc, he is 1000% a black orc because he is absolutely huge. He dwarfs the other orc players. And just to put that in context, black orcs are strength 4 basic. Regular orcs are typically strength 3, even if they are blitzers that come with the block skill as standard. Varag Go-Chewer was always a big boy, and that clearly puts him in black orc territory, in my opinion. So yeah. So Varag is one of those iconic orc players who really, when you add him to a team, he had a tendency to sort of define the way his team would play from that point on, simply because he was so dominating that you would sort of build strategies around him, and you would kind of make him essentially the spearhead of every play. He had a higher than average, skill set. He had lots of useful skills that would, keep him punching and fighting in combat. And generally speaking, he was a bit of a force of nature on the pitch. Plus, he tended to move fairly quickly. There was nothing very wrong with him overall as a stat line. He was highly effective. And this model kind of shows him at his most lightly armored I've ever seen him. Blood Bowl generally has orcs as the tough stereotype, other than dwarves, who are, if anything, even tougher but a little bit on the slow side. Orcs that occupy that strange middle ground between the relatively speedy human team and the much slower and tougher dwarf teams. So orcs actually are a really interesting choice in Blood Bowl. They play really well. Their high armor values tend to make them quite good because they tend to hold on to whatever skills that they acquire, and they don't die so easily, which is great. Which is the opposite problem with elves, right? Because elves have a tendency to die a lot. They die with aplomb, as it were, simply because they never, even the stars never quite have the level of armor that orc players tend to have, and Varag is a particularly good example of this. Now, in this edition, Varag had block, jump up, which was, like I mentioned, the unusual skill that allows him to start from a vertical base every single drive, more or less, as long as you activated him. He also had Leader, Mighty Blow, and Pro. Leader, of course, gives him another reroll. Pro, Leader will allow him to give somebody else a reroll, and Pro will give him a reroll, so he was just a very reliable player overall. and then Mighty Blow would add strength to the damage that he did. It would make it more easy for him to punch through the target's armor, so those that he hit tended to stay down, which is really useful for an orc team, because orc teams rely on basically on putting enemy players out of action so that they can easily score, since they lack the ability to dodge or to move with any kind of quickness to the enemy's end zone. So it was really useful to sort of get enemy players out of play ASAP, so that you could start having free reign over the pitch. In particular, this is really useful against elves, because elves are, as everyone knows, a bit bullshit. Because elves are able to pull off so many things that orcs struggle with. It was always really useful to have their players off the pitch ASAP, and so Mighty Blow was a really useful way to have that. But otherwise, all things considered, I don't think Varag was a particularly effective player over most of his tenure. He tended to be the orc player. I mean, despite his backstory, right, where they describe him as the orc that has that plays with a little bit of tactical finesse and so on. Varag isn't really an enabler. He's a killer, absolutely. He's a bit of a like a meat grinder. He's pretty effective in a fight, and you really don't mind having him to add a little bit of strength to your lineup. But the thing is, generally speaking, orcs don't really need any further strength or resilience, because they've got that in spades already. And a basic starting orc team coming out of the gate was fairly effective as is. You didn't really need any additional strength or punchiness. Most orc teams would do just fine in a fight anyway. So his inclusion was always a little bit questionable, unless the orc team was very far behind on points, in which case you might be able to induce him for essentially what was free, because the nature of Blood Bowl is, if your team is behind on points, on money, essentially your treasury was smaller and your team value was lower, then what would happen is that everybody else in the old world would suddenly throw in their lot behind you to try to cause an upset, and they would sneak in extra resources and funds in order for your team to maybe hire a dead ringer or two, and the perfect dead ringer, or at least the iconic dead ringer, not the perfect one, because like I mentioned, this guy doesn't really have the skills that orc teams need to score more, was Varag. And yeah, so unfortunately, despite the fact that this model is really charming and really nice, a model like this is very rare to see on the pitch, because like I mentioned, yeah, he doesn't really bring anything to the team that the orc team doesn't already have in spades, unfortunately. But despite this, he is a very nice model, and I would say he's one of the most iconic of his period. Pity you didn't really get to see him that much, but yeah, sometimes that's just how it is. Cool, so a little bit more orc flesh on this little spot that I missed, the edge of his knuckle. And I think what we're going to do is to come back in and start to redefine some of the shades now. I actually do like the shade of orc flesh for GW contrast paint. I think it's an interesting, slightly bluish shade of green, which is typically not what you see in the pictures that you see in White Dwarf magazine and online. The heavy metal team seems to be recently favoring a more apple green kind of color. To my mind, that's probably closer to Mantis Warriors green, shaded with a little bit of Biltan green shade, which kind of makes it kind of like an apple green color. This color, on the other hand, is a little bit more desaturated, but I don't mind it. I think it actually looks pretty good. And I like to use this on orc characters because it just makes them look slightly tougher while still keeping them in that green spectrum, not crossing over into black orc territory quite yet. That is, unless of course you're intending to use him as a black orc, in which case, sure, do what you will to make the team look like you want it to look. So I am coming in with silver to do some of the spikes, as well as the knuckle dusters that he's got on. Knuckle dusters seem not to be considered a weapon in Blood Bowl, judging by the number of times you see them on miniatures. In a way, you could sort of think of them as just a way to stop your knuckles or your fingers from breaking when you punch something like a troll. Sure, I am on board with that logic. Not punching a troll with my hands anytime soon. Absolutely not. That would be a bad idea. So a little bit more silver on all of these spots, and I think we should be in a good state. So the colors for the gouged eye were basically red and white with checks. So that's traditional. In fact, I believe the regular orc team that you get, which oddly enough has become quite hard to get hold of for Blood Bowl, for this Blood Bowl 2020, is the gouged eye team, which is why Varek's, the fact that Varek has gone for a bit of a walk and never quite came home to the camp. A little bit strange, I suppose, but I guess the plot of Blood Bowl has to advance from time to time. And if anything, I'm happy to see that there are more teams rather than less teams, simply because I think Blood Bowl is probably my favorite GW game. I mean, certainly it was the one that I started with, and it was the one that I played most seriously, even until recently. It's still the game that I do still support, because I think for Blood Bowl 2020 at least, Games Workshop has kind of done right by the Blood Bowl community. Because at one point, Blood Bowl was a dead game. It was completely forgotten by the wayside and kept alive only by fan activity. So I think when it comes to, all the usual dodgy things that Games Workshop does, unfortunately with their miniature games, I think they've been very gentle, very careful to try to court the favor of the Blood Bowl fans again. Because, and this might surprise you, Blood Bowl is probably probably Games Workshop's most played game worldwide. Recently, there was the annual Blood Bowl World Cup, and this year it was in I believe it was in Spain, and it was attended by well over 4,000 players. So that should tell you a little bit about how popular Blood Bowl actually is worldwide, and not mostly in the UK. I think that's the other thing. Blood Bowl has become a bit of an international thing. It's particularly popular in parts of Europe, I think, like Spain. Well, yeah, I believe the last World Cup was held in Alicante, and it was a huge event. From what I understand, it did amazingly well. Yeah, as far as attendance is concerned. So yeah, I think part of the challenge is for Games Workshop is because Blood Bowl technically allows you to play the game with just a single team. The lack of recurrent spend was a little bit concerning for the executives, and therefore they let it fall by the wayside. And then, of course, that sort of official governing body, the NAF, which was basically National American Football? NAF? Something like that. Essentially took over, and that had the blessing of Jervis Johnson, right, who was the writer for Blood Bowl. So yeah. Okay, I'm going to take a hairdryer break. Back in a second. Hey gents. Okay, we are back after our hairdryer break, and while I was waiting for things to dry, I actually took the time to actually fact check some of the things that I just mentioned. So yeah, Nuffle American League. The NAF is the Nuffle American League, which is kind of hilarious when you think about it, because Amorical is clearly American, as in American football. Nuffle Armorical football. Kind of cool. And the last Blood Bowl World Cup was in Alicante, Spain, and it was just last year, I believe, to the tune of 4,000 plus players. And it isn't an annual event. It happens once every couple of years. I think it kind of depends on the individual organizers, but generally speaking, the gap is maybe once in every 4 years or so. So yeah, Blood Bowl, most played Games Workshop game. By that metric, it is the most popular game. Maybe it doesn't quite generate the sales as the bigger war games, but that is a challenge of Games Workshop's own making. And the game has done right by its community so far, because I think Games Workshop is mortally afraid that people will stop buying their plastic kits. To be fair, the plastic kits for Games Workshop's version of Blood Bowl, they're pretty nice. There is a very large number of third-party teams out there, and overall Blood Bowl remains a very easy game to get into. You know how people talk about how like it's really easy to get into Kill Team and so on. It's far easier to get into Blood Bowl, because literally all you need is one box in theory, with very few exceptions. Some of the teams may require big guys to play, but for the most part, you can play a rudimentary version of every team out of one box in Blood Bowl, and then basically that allows you a really low cost of entry, and you can sort of enjoy the game at that level. And then of course you can sort of expand it to any extent that you really see fit beyond that point. But to get in is really good. Plus, I think right now every single rule book, or rather every single team, comes with a complete set of rules to play that particular team. So beyond owning the team and the rules for that team, all you really need is the rule book, the main rule book, and you can sort of go from that point and enjoy the game as is. There are also variations of the game, and I think the most worthy one to mention is Blood Bowl Sevens. Blood Bowl Sevens, as the name suggests, is kind of Blood Bowl played with 7 players, 7 or more players really, because you can have a reserve. But the idea is that you build a half team, and the concept behind Sevens is that you're really playing the underleagues, the kind of poorly funded amateur side of the sport. And that's just really funny to me for some reason. The idea that anyone would play something quite so lethal as Blood Bowl at an amateur level. But when you think about it, it has to exist if people want to make their way to full-blown Blood Bowl. So yeah, wonderful game. What's the game like? I think far and away the best thing about Blood Bowl is the fact that it's played on a grid. Yeah, I've got very strong opinions about the idea that Blood Bowl, or rather that many Games Workshop games tend to break down into arguing a lot. I think there are just too many ways that opponents can sort of disagree in games like 40k and Warhammer, whether the Old World or Age of Sigmar or anything like that. Simply because you are using tape measures on a crowded table, you have to determine all manner of silly things like line of sight and so on. And these are just not going to be an issue if you are going to be playing Blood Bowl, because the grid system, just the fact that you play on a pitch with squares, kind of makes it so that you know exactly how many squares you are away from winning. There's no measurements, there's no issues. Your opponent can help you keep count of your moves as you make them. In fact, in tournaments, you can bet your life they will stop you from making a mistake, that is. And yeah, I think it's just a far more friendly and a far more, well, okay, friendly's relative, right? It really depends on your opponent. But I guess what I mean to say is that it's a far more transparent game. There are no hidden, there's nothing hidden, there's no player rosters, whatever army list building, so to speak, that you do in the game is of a fairly simple nature. You just need to add up the costs of your either 7 or 11-ish numbers of players, and it's just really hard to get things wrong at that stage if you're going to be, trying to figure out what your opponent is capable of doing to you. And for the most part, you're made to declare everything that you are trying to attempt, and then before you do it, you need to say exactly what you're trying to do, and then you roll the dice. So it's just really, really hard to cheat, honestly, for Blood Bowl. And that simple expedient makes it so that Blood Bowl tournaments in general tend to go a lot smoother, and there's a lot less arguing, which is really what you want in any game, let alone a Games Workshop game. Sorry, gents. Flesh is here. We can continue. Huzzah. Okay, so undiluted orc flesh into the recesses. The first pass that I did just now, I forgot to mention, was cut with a bit of contrast medium so that it would create a slightly less opaque outcome. That added little bit of translucency has given us a little bit more nuance, which we will be making full use of in this stage as we work towards applying a set of highlights. But first, before that, we're going to be doing some shading to give a little bit more definition to our orky boy over here. So as you would expect, Varag is absolutely ripped, and he is a big boy. Also, he's got really nicely sculpted features, and he's got a lot of muscle. Really an orc's orc, if you think about it. Cool. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is we're going to come in and do a lot of black. For this model, because he is essentially wearing a football or American football strip, I really wanted to avoid using many colors which aren't the team colors. So red, black, and white would be the primary colors. The black and white really come from the checks. But yeah, so keeping the palette kind of minimal was kind of key to the whole idea. That sort of wife beater like outfit, that sort of singlet, wife beater tank top that he's wearing, underneath his gear, I will be highlighting with white in order to lighten it greatly. I made an exception for that because I thought it would be good to kind of have something that represented how Varag sort of dresses on a day-to-day basis when he's not wearing his kit. He's just such a big star that he wears his strip directly over his home clothing, as it were, his casual wear. And I just thought that sort of like languid sports star behavior is kind of amusing. So I'm putting Black Legion essentially over all of these little bits of like strapping, because Varag kind of has this gladiator kind of outfit with just lots of leather thongs holding the various plates of his armor onto him. And as I mentioned, in the interests of not adding too many colors to his outfit to confuse the team strip, I've decided to just do this mostly in Black Legion. It makes sense also that he's got this eye patch which will be black over this sun icon, which is a very black orc thing, to be fair. Very iconic of Alan and Michael Perry's Black Orcs, for example, from Warhammer Quest and the Chaos Dwarf and Orc and Goblin armies of the time. So yeah, maybe there is more to the idea that he already was a Black Orc at the time. Maybe. No, I don't buy it. He was an orc, always was an orc blitzer, retroactively retconned into being a Black Orc later, bearing in mind that Black Orcs were created in a lab, sort of like Powerpuff Girl style, by the Chaos Dwarves. There is definitely something dodgy going on. But yeah, maybe he got Primarised. Sure. Cross the Rubicon Primaris to become a bigger Space Marine. But there you go. Sometimes that is the march of progress. If you're a mainline Games Workshop game, it's just what has to happen. They want to sell you more toys. Cool. So, Varag is looking pretty good, in my opinion. His color is uncomplicated, right? His color scheme is a fairly uncomplicated one. The strip is fairly recognizable, very red, very black, all very traditional orc colors, making this the quintessential orc team. That whole rags to riches story, though, I remember reading when I was starting out in Blood Bowl many years ago, back when the block dice was more of a table than a series of bespoke dice with all the results printed on them. So that was just a long ass time ago. But Blood Bowl is quite the game, and I have stuck with it. Yeah, so a little bit more Black Templar, and we should be rolling smoothly along. Now we've got to go into the straps of his helmet, which, all things considered, he's wearing quite a bit of equipment, pretty professional looking, and all of his gear seems to be fairly well maintained as well. Although whether or not you choose to cover it in dings and scratches is entirely up to you. But yeah, this is one orc who actually looks like he's showing up ready and prepared to play Blood Bowl, as befits his hero star player status. Very, very cool. Yeah. Why he has quite so many straps though is it's almost as if this orc has some kind of an unsavoury hobby behind the scenes, but I wouldn't know anything about that. There we go. The less we know about what an orc does in his spare time, the better, in my opinion. But there you go. Okay. Looking pretty good. Looking pretty good. So yeah, I think I want to keep the use of gold to a minimum, simply because I think nowhere on the in the gouge eye strip does gold occur as a main color. So if I do add any gold, it will probably just be to have a little bit of ostentation, or maybe it's a reference to the many awards and trophies that this guy has won. But I think I will keep the color scheme fairly basic, simply because I don't think Blood Bowl models necessarily benefit from having very ostentatious gear for the most part, unless it's a major part of the team's character. I really like the idea that Blood Bowl players actually look like part of their team. So to this end, whenever I have a Blood Bowl like star show up, if I, on rare occasions that I actually use a model, I either print one up using my 3D printer, or else I look for a specific old model lying around. This guy, for example, is going to be getting some game time probably fairly soon as part of an exhibition match versus Gryph Overlord and his. I would prefer the Reclin Reavers, but depending on my opponent, he might choose to play as the Bogenhafen Barons, because that's just how it is when you divide the fan base with new releases. Can't always have it one way, and anyway, the hobby is big enough for us all to enjoy, so that's fine. Cool. It's got these leather straps, leather teruges, very Roman, oddly enough. Again, it's an extension of that kind of gladiatorial combat kind of look, I believe. I guess when you think about it and you sort of set out to sculpt an orc hero or character, what are you going to use as a reference? He would have to be fairly, violent one way or other, because that's the expectation for orcs in general, and it's just the way they play the game. You're not going to create an orc that looks really, sort of like really nimble and dodgy. Generally speaking, that's the purview of elves. It would have been nice if traditionally the orc players had a goblin star player, actually, because I think goblins, other than the copious number of like special weapons and secret weapons that are part and parcel of playing a goblin team, they actually don't get a lot of quality goblin players. I thought it would have been nice if there was a goblin player who had kind of reached maybe not quite the levels of stardom as Varag, but maybe sort of close. Maybe he could be there because I don't know, Blood Bowl and just its approach to humor is kind of brilliant, right? You can do so many interesting things. Maybe the idea that popped into my head is, why not have a goblin who is essentially like he's achieved the heights of greatness, because every time he dies, he just gets replaced by another goblin who takes on his name and his personality. After all, who really looks too closely at goblins? And then you have a little bit of an opportunity to have essentially a goblin phoenix lord, someone who is endlessly reincarnated into the role. And because your average human, elf, dwarf can't tell the difference between one goblin and another, maybe that goblin's gone on to become quite successful in his old age. And yeah, he's kind of reached the heady ranks of being a star player. I don't know. Would have been nice to have one star player that wasn't just, a chainsaw loony or some other kind of likely to be sent off kind of star player. But them's the bricks. Not every race is capable, I suppose, of producing, somebody with that bloody-minded collection of skills to produce a star player, I suppose. And maybe that's just how it has to be. Cool. So Varag is looking nice, looking very nice indeed. I'm going to come in and start adding highlights over his wife beater tunic, because as it is, this is far too yellow for me. I kind of want it to be a little bit stained, a little bit, covered and worn, covered in like stains and wear. Not quite this like ivory color though, more like a dirty white. And with that in mind, I'm applying highlights using Vallejo Silver Grey, which is my go-to color, as you know by now, probably, for as the undercoat that I use, or at least the color that I use to clean up my spray undercoat, which is actually Pylox Grey White. Favorite color. More details on these kinds of paints for most of my standard formulae in the video description, so you can go ahead and check that in case I forget to mention it, or I mention it in passing and you miss it. Always do feel like you can go to the bottom of my description where I have listed up all my paint formulae, and I am still updating with more bits and bobs that you might find helpful in our journey together painting retro models. So yeah, adding some highlights just loosely across this furry bit. I imagine he kicked to death some poor, I don't know, light colored animal. I hope it's not a dog. But you never know with dogs, do you? But yeah, we'll say he kicked a sheep, okay? Let's compromise. He's badass, but not quite badass enough to bring himself to be able to kick a dog to death. It's a step too far. Cool. Now, a little bit more skeleton horde for his teeth. I kept it for this stage because I wanted to clean up his teeth with a little bit of silver grey. Actually, I need to do that one as well. But yeah, looking alright. And a little bit of gold wash, which is my usual way of treating gold, which is just to have a wash of Nazdreg yellow plus Seraphim Sepia and apply that over straight silver. This way you get to shade it in a way that looks really good from the get-go. It's a one-step silver that you don't need to worry about reapplying. And maybe you can stand to have one less paint in your collection as a result of using this mix and this method of painting. Assuming you like it, of course. Just assuming you like the way it looks. So Vallejo light green with a little bit of silver grey is the highlight. And we're going to come in and add a little bit more detail to his fleshy bits. He's got quite a nasty scar on his lower lip, or his chin rather. So we'll come in and maybe add a little bit of bruising a little bit later on. But otherwise, we're just going to be focusing on the usual points of an orc's face. The tiny little cheekbones, the nose, the eyebrow ridge, and that vast expanse of upper lip space. think he's starting to come together quite nicely. At least the skin tone is. A little bit more on his muscle, of which he has lots. And his knee over here, the little bit where I got some silver on. Always satisfying to clean up a spill or a stain with a highlight. Bonus points for skipping a step. So yeah, Blood Bowl, an excellent game to pick up if you enjoy sort of sequential decision making. The core, if I had to sort of sum up Blood Bowl rules, Blood Bowl can come across as very technical and very complicated to people, but really what it is trying to decide on your sequence of actions to play out, because there is a sudden death mechanic that causes turn to pass over to your opponent should you make a mistake. And I think that's the part that really takes a lot of brain power out of your players. Blood Bowl can get a bit taxing if you're playing a team that has a lot of issues to cope with. So for example, if you're playing an ogre team, they've got a tendency to suddenly get boneheaded in the middle of the team, in the middle of a half, and stop actually playing the game and sort of just staring around stupidly. Trolls are even worse, right? Because they have a tendency to shut down completely. So there's a little bit of mental overhead for you to plan this kind of unexpected behavior into your tactics. The orc team, for the most part, I feel is pretty good. It's one of the teams that I typically suggest new players try out, simply because the orc team is a fairly reliable team that doesn't really have too much extra complication when it comes to playing the game. Plus, it rewards good fundamentals, sort of a slow, methodical play style. Your characters, your players tend to be a lot tougher than your opponents, so whatever upgrades that you pick up along the way, you tend to retain and keep your skills and levels up. Less frustrating than elves in that regard, because while elves tend to pick up a lot of skills and level ups, they also tend to die permanently a lot more regularly. But orcs kind of don't have the downside of being too turgid and too slow, to the point where they struggle to actually score and win the game. Because as much as it's fun to kill your opponents on the pitch, your main job is actually to really try to score touchdowns and therefore win the game. Most orc teams tend to be fairly effective fighters, holding their own against the likes of Chaos, which, to be fair, is quite an achievement considering how hard Chaos teams tend to be. Hey guys. Okay, cool. So some time has passed because I didn't get to finish this model off yesterday as I originally planned, but it's okay, we'll just pick up things where we left off and move on. So this little area over here, I kind of thought it was a garment. Turns out that it seems to be the same material that he has around his furry boots, because as we all know, orcs have to dress like barbarians. It's just their thing. There's some vague Conan sort of callbacks to on this model, and I kind of like the look of that. So we're going to come in and we're going to emphasize this area. It does, however, make me question if I want to do the fur in as light of a color as his tank top, because I think it might look a little bit better if it was slightly more different. So I might just do that. But yeah, so that bit is done. And then after that, I'm coming in with a little bit of snakebite leather on the soles of his shoes. I actually do like it when like older models have the rubber or the leather soles of the shoes as a separate piece on the model. I just think it's a little bit of realism that kind of looks really good when you do it right. Plus, it gives you another color with which to define the shoes. And it looks really good when the foot is raised, because you get to see the underside, the sort of detail of the sole. So that's pretty nice. And Now the question is whether or not I want to darken this. I believe I will have to, so I'm going to use a little bit of snakebite leather, thin down slightly, just to get a little bit more color into that to differentiate it from the tank top that he's got wearing. Because they can be similar in color, but I don't think they should be don't think they should be exactly the same color. Basically, is what I'm trying to say. Because then it starts to look a little bit samey. And I have been resolutely trying to avoid adding too many colors on this miniature, but he is a star player, so after all, so it's kind of inevitable that he gets a little bit more bling on him. So with that in mind, I'm probably going to do the forehead icon that he's got, that little skull on his forehead, as well as the one on his belt buckle. Probably going to do both of those gold as well, because once you do gold somewhere, which was originally on these 3 tassels below, you kind of need to do gold elsewhere as well. Then again, the belt buckle one looks pretty good. Maybe just the forehead one then. So yeah, there we go. Nothing too complicated with this method of doing gold. Just a bit of Nazdreg yellow plus Seraphim Sepia over the top. And I think that looks pretty good. The punch dagger, I'm convinced needs to be one piece though. I'd rather not do the edge of that if possible, although many versions of this paint job seem to do that quite a bit. But let's just steer clear of that. Right, so I'm going to jump in and do a little bit more, put a bit of silver on each of these little studs. These are the bits that I fear the most when I record videos, because sometimes it can get a little bit hard to do this on camera. Thankfully, these studs are kind of large and visible, which is kind of nice. They're also a little bit faceted, which is really quite interesting. But at least there is a little bit of logic as to how this thing holds itself together. So that's nice. Yeah, like I mentioned before, I'm kind of secretly quite afraid of doing Slaaneshi models, because a lot of Rogue Trader Slaaneshi models have a lot of just studded leggings on, I suppose. Like they have these leggings with like regular rivets like sewn on. So I'm a little bit apprehensive about how to do that on camera, but eventually we'll need to get there. I'll find a way to do it that makes it look, neat and clear without causing me too much tension. But not to worry, I'll solve that. And if it doesn't turn out as great as I hope, well, you know why. So yeah, but it begins with actually sort of facing the challenge head on, giving it a shot. Because right now I haven't actually done it, so I haven't actually corroborated my concern. And maybe it'll turn out just fine, no issue at all. Yeah. So I'm kind of amazed how many studs there are on this actually. It's kind of going all the way around the side of it. There we go. Okay, pretty good. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, okay. Cool. Just a little bit of silver to refine those areas. Now I want to come right in and do his eyes quickly with ice yellow, then a bit of red contrast over it, just to give that sort of ring, and then maybe a little bit of ice yellow again in the center. So let's see. There is an eyeball in there, which is nice. Not too hard to do, I think. It's kind of okay. Kind of okay. Not perfect, but there you go. Right. Okay, that's better. So, and then once that's fully dry, I'll want to come in to do like the pupils, or rather shade around it, not do the pupils. Pardon me. Let's do the ogre face at his belt as well, together with. Does he have teeth? It doesn't look like he has teeth, so maybe not. Right. He's also got a lot more studs on his knee. So yeah, lots more little silver bits to pick up. I guess I shouldn't be too surprised. This guy is supposed to be a special character after all. So I guess a little bit of bling kind of helps him to stand out from his fellows. Look a little bit more impressive on the pitch. And all things considered, at least the rivets are kind of placed in semi-sensible locations. Now, I say this as I do the ones on the blades, and these are the ones that make the least sense because there's nothing really to rivet to that point. Now onto the ones on his back. So many rivets, dude. Do you really need all these rivets? But then again, this is the era of Blood Bowl where everyone had essentially spikes on every football. I believe the rulebook said that the spikes make it easier for the ball to stick to players. Wonderful. That's what you want to hear, right? The idea that the ball will stick to your player. Maybe it'll make it a little bit easier for them to pick up the ball, but you know what? No, it's the same. It's still 3+ for your average agility 3 player. So it's equally rough back then. No easier at all. Okay, so now we go over the eye with a bit of red. Sort of glaze it down, leaving a bit of red at the circumference of the eye. Brush off a bit of the excess so that the pupils, the sort of pupil shine is a bit more visible. And that looks okay. And then lastly, we want to come back in with a finer brush tail to drop a bit of ice yellow again, dead center. Like so. And then on this side as well, which is the tricky side really. There's always a tricky side on miniatures. Something like that. Yeah, that's okay. Cool. I think we are mostly in a good place. A little bit more of a highlight on the red areas, and I think we should be calling this good. A little bit at the top. Just to harden the edge a little bit. And more on his fingers. And I think we should be in a good place. The ends of the knuckles, as always, a favorite place for a highlight to be placed. And everywhere else that you really want to jump out at your viewer. For the ogre face, we do the nose, we do this eyebrow ridge, and then we do the lips, and lastly the cheekbones on the edge. There we go. A little bit more on that cloth, and I think Nazdreg is ready to rock. Very nice. So one thing I really like about Blood Bowl is you really get the opportunity to try to paint models in unconventional colors. I know this isn't the best example of that, but in theory, you could try to push yourself to paint a model in an uncharacteristic color scheme. So if you want to do dwarves, You could try doing dwarves in like jet black, which is just really interesting, or you could do orcs in something really unusual, like even pink, or so on. Because what you're really trying to do is to paint sport strip, right, like a uniform. So you really take the idea of that team color to the next level, and that can be very very interesting. You could do like high elves in purple. You could do dark elves in white, that sort of thing, and that keeps the experience of painting these models really interesting because no two teams need ever look exactly alike, and that's really nice. And done well, you could do quite an impressive color scheme. It also means that you could do, like, say, a corn team in white. Just absolutely cover them in blood spatters, because there's a difference between just environmental colors and just the results of their bloodletting, as opposed to just the color scheme that they started the game with, theoretically. And that's kind of interesting. Cool. So I want to do a little bit of a gray highlight. Nothing too spectacular, nothing too complicated. Just a little bit of black to get some color going. Of course, I can never find my black when I want it. Black Legion will have to do. Da-da-da. And a little bit of white into that. And we should have a bit of a basic highlight color going. And the reason for this is that there is quite a lot of strapping on him. And if I kind of leave this unhighlighted, it's going to look a bit flat. So we don't need to put a lot of this stuff on, just a little bit in all the very prominent areas, like the eye patch and the ogre face. And that's actually a term from a lot of the painting guides from this period, that those funny little faces are actually the faces of ogres for some reason, and orcs seem to like using them as their evil sun's logo. Yeah, not sure why specifically orcs are so into the idea of ogres, but I guess they like big, strong, tough things, right? So ogres are big, strong, and tough, so kind of perfect. But they are kind of a stylized sort of thing as well, so that's kind of cool. A little bit more on the straps. Around the sides. Nothing too dramatic at all, just a little bit to lift and give you a bit of visual separation from the sides. And around the front as well. And especially this ear flap. And yeah. Now a touch of non-oil to shade down the studs on the leather bits. And I think we are just about ready to call this done. Not too bad. Because you want these to be bright but not overwhelmingly bright. You want it to still kind of respect the ambient light conditions that you have, or that you're trying to portray via these colors. And doing this actually ensures that you get like a nice little black trim around every point of light, making it even more visual and clear from a distance. And if you're going to be putting effort into doing this anyway, then you might as well take the time to spend a bit more time to get it just right. So there. Okay, so that's it. I think he's pretty good. I quite like the way Varag looks at this point. So this is what I would take onto a Blood Bowl pitch. I hope you enjoyed watching him, well, watching me paint him. And yeah, see you in the next one. Like, comment, subscribe, all the good stuff if you enjoyed watching this video. I'll see you again soon. Cheers. Bye bye.